good evening, morning, afternoon, or whatever time it may be for you. You are about to listen to a Royal Mirror audio story. The audio will be accompanied with visuals to enhance the experience. However, if you prefer to simply listen, they aren't necessary. If you'd like to follow along, or would simply prefer to read the story, you can find a link to the text in the description below. I hope you enjoy. Now, on to our tale. War. Another reality. The Vortex of New Valois. Epilogue. Voodoo sat upright in his chair beside one of his fellow knights as the cleric, their liaison from communion, went over the details of Voodoo's recent mission. The consistent acceleration of the HMS Fidelis as it burned towards Charlemagne's FTL portal kept the three men seated comfortably in the circular briefing room in spite of the lack of natural gravity. Voodoo wondered if it had been configured to match the gravity on Domura, the human homeworld. The discussion had to be quite unpleasant if a medic was reminiscing fondly about his limited physics education to avoid paying attention. Voodoo supposed his old instructor would have had something pedantic to say about the exact gravitational constant he was using in his idle mental calculations. But at least it kept him distracted from the cleric's debriefing. Fortunately, he'd been able to get out of his kit and into his dress uniform of white pants and a white surcoat with black accents. The circular emblem of the Anointed was emblazoned on the front. The surcoat was held closed by a belt that matched the accents. Both the belt and the shoulder pauldrons held Voodoo's 2 golden stripes of rank, indicating his position as a paladin. He took a glance to his right, at the other knight in the room, Wulfric. He was clad in the same dress uniform. He was noticeably quite a few years younger than Voodoo, but had 3 stripes of rank, singling his station as an imperator. Neither of their ranks mattered with the cleric in the room. Not that they ever worried too much about rank. They exchanged a glance. Wulfric gave a sympathetic look, indicating that he had a similarly negative opinion of the current state of affairs. There was no question that Communion and the Knights Principe were no longer on equal footing, and the cleric made no effort to hide that fact. However, Voodoo and other knights worked with Communion where their values and interests aligned, such as in Voodoo's most recent mission to Charlemagne. Still more knights, likely the majority, were more than willing to compromise their values to get on Communion's good side, or even to join the organization and reap the myriad of political and economic benefits. The cleric himself was a knight, although he rarely wore his uniform or participated in knight functions. Voodoo, I am extremely pleased you were able to develop a cure and re-establish a temporary void tether to New Valois, the cleric stated, stroking his salt and pepper-colored beard. The augmented reality projector at the center of the briefing room displayed a 3D model of Voodoo's path through the city, as well as a floating window showing Voodoo's helmet cam recording. The image was frozen and cracked, the enforcer droid that ended the recording visible in the background. This paramedic you worked with shows great promise as well. I'll need to see about formally inviting him into Communion. If he'll have us, of course. The cleric stood slowly, gracefully adjusting his robe as he did so. There is, however, one issue with your conduct, Knight. He placed one hand on the AR projector and leaned in towards the helmet cam window. A quick swipe brought them close to the start of the recording, showing Voodoo towering over the scavenger, Silas. The cleric lifted his open palm towards the scavenger. This is who you are making the cure for, Voodoo. This is who needed your help. This is a citizen of New Valois. As a result of your actions, He now has a critical chest wound. The knight was glad there was no evidence that Liam had been the one to deliver that chest wound, albeit with Voodoo's gun. The paramedic didn't need the attention. The cleric folded his arms as he continued. I don't doubt your claim that he fired first, Voodoo. However, you had ample opportunity to de-escalate or simply disengage. Just because someone's actions when they're tired, cold, and hungry aren't ideal does not make them your enemy. You exist to aid all citizens of the UMR. Do you understand? Voodoo didn't disagree with any of the cleric's words, of course, but he disagreed with the cleric's implicit conclusions. In Voodoo's opinion, the cleric wasn't considering the needs of others on New Valois, or even Silas's own critical need for correction of his destructive behavior. The knight stood to attention aggressively, keeping the gnawing anger from the cleric's insinuations in check. He half bowed his head in a salute towards the robed man. Yes, sir, I understand. Just a few years ago, he would have followed those words up with well-reasoned arguments for his own position. He would have told the cleric he believed he had done what was best for Silas and for the other citizens of New Valois. He would have explained how the scavenger's selfish disruption of critical relief supplies would keep the city in its ruined state, and therefore be dangerous to himself and others. Voodoo would have insisted that if he had been in the scav's position, he would have preferred to have been stopped as well, even with violence, if necessary. Now, though, the knight didn't have any more desire for well-reasoned arguments. He wanted to yell. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell the cleric that people like Silas were hopelessly ignorant of their own best interests, that whether or not an action is evil is not mitigated by the circumstance of the man who commits it, that doing what's right is more important for a person's well-being than desires, than comfort, or even than life itself. He wanted to tell the cleric that the cleric was wrong. Instead, the knight said nothing. The cleric turned to the Imperator. Wulfric, you watched the full debrief. Do you have any suggestions for how Voodoo could have acted differently and improved outcomes? Wulfric's eyes locked with the cleric's, then moved to Voodoo's before settling downwards and to the right, taking a moment's pause to carefully consider his answer. I've never been in actual combat, like yourself or Voodoo, sir, Wulfric replied. I don't know how I would react if I had a weapon and saw the injustices that you and Voodoo have seen, so I don't think it's my place to comment. The cleric stroked his beard once, and then gave the Imperator a sly smile. You're quite slippery for a knight, Wulfric. If I didn't know better, I'd offer a career with Communion. Not trying to be slippery, sir. Just careful. The cleric raised his shoulders in a shrug. I'll let it slide. This time. He gave a curt nod to both knights. Thank you both, gentlemen. I'll organize some remedial training around this incident. Not just for you, Voodoo. The entire Knights Principe can learn from your successes. And from your failures. Now you must be tired of my ramblings. I'll bid you good night. The cleric gave a slight smile and left the briefing room, the door opening and then sealing shut behind him. Voodoo folded his arms and started to pace around the briefing floor. He's getting worse, Wulfric, the blonde knight stated simply. Pretty soon he'll want us dropping into hot zones unarmed. That is, unless he abolishes the Knights Principe completely first. The other knight finally stood up out of his chair as well, and gave Voodoo a nod. Yes, he is certainly getting worse, he and the rest of Communion. Though, this is what we expected, is it not? The blonde knight stopped his pacing in front of the briefing room's window looking out into space. Wulfric stepped forward to join him, and Voodoo turned his head towards the Imperator, cocking his brow before asking, "What do you think we should do about it?" Wulfric gave him a shrug. "Don't I ask you that same question about a dozen times a day?" A lightly taunting grin spread onto the Imperator's face as he continued. "I thought you were supposed to be the experienced veteran, giving me your wise counsel." He paused for a moment. Then, with no other input from Voodoo, he inhaled sharply before concluding. "Anointed just war theory demands that we have permission from the Sovereign, and that we be able to effect positive, meaningful change from any violent conflict. The Cleric is the Sovereign, and we have no chance in any conflict without the UMR's military. So I believe our only option is to use force where the Cleric allows it, and force is appropriate. Outside of that, we must simply live virtuous lives ourselves, and leave victory to the Anointed." Voodoo smirked, and glanced over at Wulfric. "Well, that's a very rational statement of doctrine. Then again, you never seem to have any trouble with intellectual accuracy, Wulfric." The Imperator laughed openly at that statement, and turned to face Voodoo directly. "The implication being that my spiritual aim and my behavior and practice need a bit of work?" Voodoo returned the laugh in kind, and responded in a light-hearted, albeit meaningful way. "Well, I don't feel bad about that, Wulfric. I'm pretty sure the Knights Principe's manual of ballistic weaponry states that we're all zeroed a few mils short of the greatness of the Anointed, or something to that effect." Voodoo turned away from the window to look directly at Wulfric. "If the worst does come to pass, if hordes of hate-filled people tear through the hull of the Fidelis, seeking the blood of you and yours, blaming you, the Knights Principe, or even simply their fellow man for their own sickness, their own poverty, their own mistakes, will you be able to still see them as your brothers, as the Cleric insists we already don't, as you and I both know we're obligated to?" Wulfric swallowed noticeably, clearly nervous at the question. "I meant what I said to the Cleric. I've never been in battle. I've never seen hardship like you have, Voodoo. I don't know." Voodoo sighed, and turned back towards the window, looking out to see the swirling storms of Charlemagne becoming nothing more than gray blobs as the planet got smaller and smaller, the Fidelis zooming away to the FTL portal and the comfort of the capital fleet. "To tell the truth, Wulfric, even though I've seen the ugliness that hardship can reveal in human beings, it's always been far away, in some foreign land. Seeing it in New Valois is the closest it's ever been to home. I suppose I can't really say how I'd react either." He took one last gaze down at the gray dot where Riot and Liam were, hopefully, still working hard to save lives and restore order. As the planet disappeared below the rim of the window and the portal came into view, Voodoo turned his head towards Wulfric once more. "Thankfully, the Anointed can use even the worst times to enlighten us. Soon, the whole UMR might look just like New Valois." Voodoo's eyes turned back towards the void of space. "Then, we'll know." This concludes our Royal Mirror audio story for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If there's an additional part to the story, it should appear in the description below when it is available. I'd like to take this time to thank all of the creators of the open source content used in this video, the ultimate creator, without whom any further creation would be impossible, and of course you, the viewer, for listening to it. Until we meet again, goodbye.